Part 1, Chapter 7a of The Adventures of Jimmie Dale. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. The Adventures of Jimmie Dale by Frank L. Packard. Reading by Lars Rolander. Part 1. The Man in the Case. Chapter 7a. The Thief. Choosing between the snowy napery, the sparkling glass and silver, the cosy shaded table lamps, the famous French chef of the ultra-exclusive St. James Club, his own home on Riverside Drive, where a dinner fit for an epicurean and served by Jason, that most perfect of butlers, awaited him, and Marlianne's, Jimmie Dale, driving in alone in his touring car from an afternoon's golf, had chosen Marlianne's. Marlianne's, if such a thing as bohemianism, or rather a concrete expression of it exists, was bohemian. A two-piece string orchestra played valiantly to the accompaniment of a hoarse-throated piano, and between courses the diners took up the refrain. And, as it was always between courses, with someone, the place was a bedlam of noisy riot. Nevertheless, it was Marlianne's, and Jimmie Dale liked Marlianne's. He had dined there many times before, as he had just dined in the person of Jimmie Dale, the millionaire, his high-priced imported car at the curb of the shabby street outside, and he had dined there, disreputable in attire, seedy in appearance, with the police yelping at his heels, as Larry the Bat. In either character, Marlianne's had welcomed him with equal courtesy to its spotted linen and most excellent table d'hote, with vin ordinaire for 50 cents. And now, in the act of reaching into his pocket for the change to pay his bill, Jimmie Dale seemed suddenly to experience some difficulty in finding what he sought, and his fingers went fumbling from one pocket to another. Two men at the table in front of him were talking. Their voices, over a momentary lull in violin squeaks, talk, laughter, singing, and the clatter of dishes reached him. Carling! Commit suicide? Not on your life! No, of course it didn't. It was that cursed Gray Seal croaked him, just as sure as you sit in that chair. The other grunted. Yes, but what did the Gray Seal want to pinch 100,000 out of the bank for, and then give it back again the next morning? What's he done 100 other things for to cover up the real object of what he's after? Retorted the first speaker, with a short, vicious laugh. Then, with a thump of his fist on the table, the man's a devil, a fiend, and anywhere else but New York he'd have been caught and sent to the chair where he belongs long ago, and a burst of ragtime drowned out the man's words. Jimmie Dale placed a 50-cent piece and a tip beside it on his dinner check, pushed back his chair, and rose from the table. There was a half-tolerantly satirical, half-angry glint in his dark, steady eyes. It was not only the police who yelped at his heels, but every man, woman, and child in the city. The man had not voiced his own sentiments, he had voiced the sentiments of New York. And it was quite on the cards that if he, Jimmie Dale, were ever caught, his destination would not even be the death cell and the chair at Sing Sing. His fellow citizens had reached a pitch where they would be quite capable of literally tearing him to pieces if they ever got their hands on him. And yet there were a few, a very few, a handful out of 5 millions, who sometimes remembered perhaps to thank God that the Gray Seal lived. That was his reward, that, and she, whose mysterious letters prompted and impelled his, the Gray Seal's acts. She, nameless, fascinating in her brilliant resourcefulness, amazing in her power, a woman whose life was bound up with his and yet held apart from him in the most inexplicable, absorbing way, a woman he had never seen, save for her gloved arm in the limousine that night, who at one unexpected moment projected a dazzling impersonal existence across his path, and the next, leaving him battling for his life, where greed and passion and crime swirled about him, was gone. Jimmie Dale threaded the small, crowded rooms. The interior of Marlianne's had never been altered from the days when the place had been a family residence of some pretension, and reaching the hall, received his hat from the frowsy-looking boy in attendance. He passed outside, and at the top of the steps paused as he took his cigarette case from his pocket. It was nearly a week since Carling, the cashier of the Hudson Mercantile National Bank, had been found dead in his home, a bottle that had contained hydrocyanic acid on the floor beside him. Nearly a week since bookkeeper Bob, unaware that he had ever been under temporary suspicion for the robbery of the bank, had, equally unknown to himself, been cleared of any complicity in that affair. And yet, as witness the conversation of a moment ago, it was still the topic of New York, still the vital issue that filled the maw of newspapers with ravings, threats and excoriations against the Gray Seal, snarling virulently the while at the police for the latter's ineptitude, inefficiency and impotence. Jimmie Dale closed his cigarette case with a snap that was almost human in its irony, dropped it back into his pocket, and lighted a match. But the flame was arrested halfway to the tip of his cigarette, as his eyes fixed suddenly and curiously on a woman's form hurrying down the street. She had turned the corner before he took his eyes from her, and the match between his fingers had gone out. Not that there was anything very strange in a woman walking, or even half running, along the street, nor that there was anything particularly attractive or unusual about her, and if there had been, the street was too dark for him to have distinguished it. It was not that. It was the fact that she had neither passed by the house on whose steps he stood, nor come out of any of the adjoining houses. It was as though she had suddenly and miraculously appeared out of thin air, and taken form on a sidewalk a little way down from Marlianne's. "That's queer," commented Jimmie Dale to himself. However, he took out another match, lighted his cigarette, jerked the match stub away from him, and, with a lift of his shoulders, went down the steps. He crossed the pavement, walked around the front of his machine, since the steering wheel was on the side next to the curb, and, with his hand out to open the door, stopped. Someone had been tampering with it. It was not quite closed. There was no mistake. Jimmie Dale made no mistakes of that kind. A man whose life hung a dozen times a day on the little things could not afford to make them. He had closed it firmly, even with a bang, when he had got out. Instantly suspicious, he wrenched the door wide open, switched on the light under the hood, and, with a sharp exclamation, bent quickly forward. A glove, a woman's glove, a white glove, lay on the floor of the car. Jimmie Dale's pulse leaped suddenly into fierce pounding beats. It was hers. He knew that intuitively, knew it as he knew that he breathed. And that woman he had so leisurely watched as she disappeared from sight was, must have been, she. He sprang from the car with a jump, his first impulse to dash after her, and checked himself, laughing a little bitterly. It was too late for that now. He had already let his chance slip through his fingers. Around the corner was Sixth Avenue, surface cars, the elevated, taxicabs, a multitude of people, and any one of 100 ways in which she could and would already have discontinued pursuit from him. And, besides, he would not even have been able to recognize her if he saw her. Jimmie Dale's smile was mirthless as he turned back to the car and picked up the glove. Why had she dropped it there? It could not have been intentional. Why had... He began to tear suddenly at the glove's little finger, and in another second, kneeling on the car step, his shoulders inside, he was holding a ring, close under the little electric bulb. It was a gold seal ring, a small, dainty thing that bore a crest, a bell surmounted by a bishop's mitre, the bell, quaint in design, harking the imagination back to some old-time belfry tower. And underneath, in the scroll, a motto. It was a full minute before Jimmie Dale could decipher it, for the lettering was minute and the words, of course, reversed. It was in French. Sonnez le tocsin. He straightened up, the glove and ring in his hand, a puzzled expression on his face. It was strange. Had she, after all, dropped the glove there intentionally? Had she at last let down the barriers just a little between them, and given him this little intimate sign that she— And then Jimmie Dale laughed abruptly, self-mockingly. He was only trying to deceive himself, to argue himself into believing what with heart and soul he wanted to believe. It was not like her, and neither was it so. His eyes had fixed on the seat beside the wheel. He had not used the lap rug all that day. He couldn't use a rug and drive. He had left it folded and hanging on the rack in the tonneau. It was now neatly folded and reposing on the front seat. "Yes," said Jimmie Dale, a sort of self-pity in his tones. "I might have known." He lifted the rug. Beneath it, on the leather seat, lay a white envelope. Her letter. The letter that never came save with the plan of some grim, desperate work outlined ahead. The call to arms for the Gray Seal. Sonnez le tocsin. Ring the tocsin. Sound the alarm. The tocsin. The words were running through his brain. A strange motto on that crest, that seemed so strangely apt. The tocsin. Never once in all the times that he had heard from her, never once in the years that had gone since that initial letter of hers had struck its first warning note, had any communication from her been but to sound again a new alarm. The tocsin. The tocsin. The word seemed to visualize her, to give her a concrete form and being, to breathe her very personality. The tocsin. Jimmie Dale whispered the word softly, a little wistfully. "Yes, I shall call you that. The tocsin." He folded the glove very carefully, placed it with the ring in his pocketbook, picked up the letter, and, with a sharp exclamation, turned it quickly over in his fingers, then bent hurriedly with it to the light. Strange things were happening that night. For the first time the letter was not even sealed. That was not like her either. What did it mean? Quick, alert now, anxious even, he pulled the double folded sheets from the envelope, glanced rapidly through them, and, after a moment, a smile, whimsical, came slowly to his lips. It was quite plain now, all of it. The glove, the ring, and the unsealed letter. And the postscript held the secret. Or rather, what had been intended for a postscript did, for it comprised only of a few words, ending abruptly, unfinished. "Look in the cupboard at the rear of the room. The man with the red wig is—" That was all, and the words written in ink were badly blurred, as though the paper had been hastily folded before the ink was dry. It was quite plain, and, in view of the real explanation of it all, eminently characteristic of her. With the letter already written, she had come there, meaning to place it on the seat and cover it with the rug, as indeed she had done, then, deciding to add the postscript, and because she would attract less attention that way than in any other, she had climbed into the car as though it belonged to her, and had seated herself there to write it. She would have been hurried in her movements, of course, and in pulling off her glove to use the fountain pen, the ring had come with it. The rest was obvious. She had just begun to write when he had appeared on the steps. She had slipped instantly down to the floor of the car, probably dropping the glove from her lap, hastily enclosed the letter in the envelope which she had no time to seal, thrust the envelope under the rug, and, forgetting her glove, and fearful of risking his attention by attempting to close the door firmly, had stolen along the body of the car, only to be noticed by him too late, when she was well down the street. And at that latter thought, once more chagrin seized Jimmie Dale. Then he turned impulsively to the letter. All this was extraneous, apart for another time when every moment was not a priceless asset as it very probably was now. Dear philanthropic crook. It always began that way, never any other way. He read on more and more intently, crouched there close to the light on the floor of his car, lips thinning as he proceeded, read it to the end, absorbing, memorizing it, and then the abortive postscript. Look in the cupboard at the rear of the room. The man with the red wig is... For an instant, as mechanically he tore the letter into little shreds, he held there hesitant, and the next, slamming the door tight, he flung himself into the seat behind the wheel, and the big 60-horsepower self-starting machine was roaring down the street. The Tocsin. There was a grim smile on Jimmie Dale's lips now. The alarm. Yes, it was always an alarm, quick, sudden, an emergency to face on the instant. Plans, decisions to be made with no time to ponder them, with only that one fact to consider, staggering enough in itself, that a mistake meant disaster and ruin to someone else, and to himself, if the courts were merciful where he had little hope for mercy, the penitentiary for life. And now, tonight again, as it almost always was when these mysterious letters came, every moment of inaction was piling up the odds against him. And, too, the same problem confronted him. How, in what way, in what role must he play the night's game to its end? As Larry the Bat? The car was speeding forward. He was heading down Broadway now, lower Broadway, that stretched before him, deserted like some dark, narrow canyon where far below, like towering walls, the buildings closed together and seemed to converge into some black, impassable barrier. The street lights flashed by him. A patrolman stopped the swinging of his nightstick and turned to gaze at the car that rushed by at a rate perilously near to contempt of speed laws. Streetcars passed at indifferent intervals. Pedestrians were few and far between. It was the lower Broadway of night. Larry the Bat? Jimmie Dale shook his head impatiently over the steering wheel. No, that would not do. It would be well enough for this young Burton, perhaps, but not for old Isaac, the East Side Fence. For Isaac knew him in the character of Larry the Bat. His quick, keen brain, weaving, eliminating, devising, scheming, discarded that idea. The final coup of the night, as yet but sensed in an indefinite, unshaped way, if enacted in the person of Larry the Bat, would therefore stamp Larry the Bat and the Gray Seal as one. A contretemps but little less fatal, in view of old Isaac, than to bracket the Gray Seal and Jimmie Dale. Larry the Bat was not a character to be assumed with impunity, nor one to jeopardize. It was a bulwark of safety, as it were, to which more than once he owed escape from capture and discovery. He lifted his shoulders with a sudden jerk of decision as the car swerved to the left and headed for the east side. There was only one alternative then, the black silk mask that folded into such tiny compass, and that, together with an automatic and the curious thin metal case that looked so like a cigarette case, was always in his pocket for an emergency. The car turned again, and approaching its destination, Jimmie Dale slowed down the speed perceptibly. It was a strange case, not a pleasant one, and the raw edges where they showed were ugly in their nakedness. Old Isaac Pelina, young Burton, and Maddon K. Wilmington. Maddon, the wallpaper magnate. Curious that of the three he should already know two, old Isaac and Maddon. Everybody in the East Side, every denizen of the underworld, and many who posed on a far higher plane knew old Isaac, fence to the most select clientele of thieves in New York, unscrupulous, hand in glove with any rascality or crime that promised profit, a money lender, a Shylock without even a Shylock's humanity as a saving grace. Yes, as Larry the Bat he knew old Isaac, and he knew him not only personally, but by first-hand reputation. He had heard the man cursed in blasphemous, whole-souled abandon by more than one crook who was in the old fence's toils. They dealt with him, the crooks, while they swore to get him because he was safe. But Jimmie Dale's lips parted in a mirthless smile. Some day old Isaac would be found in that spider's den of his back of the dingy loan office with a knife in his heart or a bullet through his head. And K. Wilmington Madden, Jimmie Dale's smile grew whimsical. He had known Madden quite intimately for years, had even dined with him at the St. James Club only a few nights before. Madden was a man in his own set, and Madden, interfered with, was likely to prove none too tractable a customer to handle, and young Burton, the letter said, was Madden's private and confidential secretary. Jimmie Dale's lips thinned again. Well, Burton's acquaintance was still to be made. It was a curious trio, and it was dirty work, more raw than cunning, more devilish than ingenious, blackmail in its most hellish form. The stake, at the least calculation, a cool $500,000, a heavy price for a single slip in a man's life. He brought the car abruptly to a halt at the edge of the curb and sprang out to the ground. He was in the front of the Budapest restaurant, most popular of all resorts for the moment on the East Side, where Fifth Avenue, in the fond belief that it was seeing the real thing in seamy life, engaged its table a week in advance. Jimmie Dale pushed a bill into the door attendant's hand, accompanied by an injunction to keep an eye on the machine, and entered the café. End of Part 1, Chapter 7a. The Thief. From The Adventures of Jimmie Dale by Frank L. Packard. Read by Lars Rolander.